kind of hard to watch, isn't it? For an era of time, that was great entertainment, that kind of slapstick stuff. But we look at that now, and we've evolved as a culture. No longer do we think physical violence is funny. In fact, we know that to work out our aggressions using our fists, that's not right. We know that, right? Right? Right, yeah, now we don't use our fists. We don't do that anymore. Now we use our keyboards. Violence through that. And yet all of us have been in a place in life where we've wanted to go here. We've wanted to get physical. Something has upset us so much, or we've been so worked up about something that we've felt transformed from being these civilized people that we are, very evolved, not violent like that, to wanting to break out into a brawl like this, to wanting to punch or shove or karate chop or karate kid, right? We've all been there, and I want to ask you today, what is it that takes you from being the civilized person that you are to wanting to become, or maybe actually becoming, someone like this? Does it happen when someone steps on one of your sacred values? When someone blasphemes your God, or insults your country, or encroaches on your freedom? Is that when you just get so enraged? Or is it when someone comes after people you care about? Maybe someone attacks one of your kids, or insults your spouse, or comes after your best friend. Is that the thing that puts you in a place like that? See, the reality is, whatever it is, whatever we think it is that takes us to this kind of place, that makes us want to become very uncivilized, whatever we think it is, the truth is, the only thing that can take us from being the people that we are, pretty regulated, civilized people, to this, the only thing is when someone takes their grimy finger and starts digging in one of our wounds. That's what we're going to see today. I'm going to jump right into scripture. 1 Samuel 25. If you were here with us last week as we kicked off the series, you were introduced to some of these characters. We're going to be looking at King David, although he's not yet the king. He's the future king. God has already declared that it would be so. And he's been in this ongoing feud with King Saul, the sitting king. God has removed his favor from Saul, given it to David. And Saul is jealous of all of David's successes. And we saw this last week. They were kind of navigating some stuff. This week, things have degraded significantly. Saul is coming after David, trying to kill him, and David has had to flee to the very outskirts of Israel, and that's where this whole next encounter happens. Starts off this way. Now Samuel, we're going to come back to him. Samuel is the great prophet. Now Samuel died, and all Israel assembled and mourned for him, and they buried him at his home in Ramah. Then David moved down into the desert, the wilderness of Paran. And there, a certain man in Maon, who had property there at Carmel, was very wealthy. He had 1,000 goats and 3,000 sheep. That's how you measured your wealth in these times, not in the dollars in your bank account or the car that you drove. It was your goats and your sheep, which he was shearing in Carmel. His name was Nabal, and his wife's name was Abigail. She was an intelligent and beautiful woman, but her husband was surly and mean in his dealings, and he was also a Calebite. That's a tribe of Israel. While David was in the wilderness, he heard that Nabal was shearing his sheep. So he sent 10 young men and said to them, "Go up to Nabal at Carmel and greet him in my name. Say to him, 'Long life to you, good health to you and your household, and good health to all that is yours. Now I hear that it is sheep shearing time. When your shepherds were out with us, notice, we did not mistreat them, and the whole time they were at Carmel, nothing of theirs was missing. Neither did we steal anything, but we also protected them from loss. Ask your own servants, and they will tell you. Therefore, be favorable toward my men, since we come at a festive time. You're shearing these sheep. It's time for you to cash in. This is payday. Please give your servants and your son David whatever it is that you can find for them.' So when David's men arrived, they gave Nabal that message in David's name, and then they waited for his response. And here's what Nabal said. Nabal answered David's servants, 'Who is this David? Who is this son of Jesse? Many servants are breaking away from their masters these days. Why should I take bread and water and the meat I have slaughtered for my shearers and give it to men coming from who knows where?' Well, he knows where they're coming from. Let me just show you again. So we're down here in the wilderness of Paran. Here you can see this is the southern part of civilized Israel at the Dead Sea. It stretches all the way up. There's Jerusalem. It stretches all the way up, way north. But this is kind of the civilized part. This is the wilderness. This is the same wilderness, if you know this story, that the Israelites wandered in hundreds of years before when they left Egypt, and they wandered through the wilderness for 40 years before they came into their land. So this is a wilderness region, and that's a sign of how bad things have gotten between David and Saul. That David is no longer welcomed in the main parts of the kingdom. It's too dangerous for him there. So he's hiding out in the wilderness. Now, here's what you need to understand, a couple things about ancient Israel culture, that ancient Israelites were under this sacred code of hospitality. It was mandated by God himself. So here's the thing. If you were an ancient Israelite and someone came into your town and they didn't have a place to stay, you were obligated to give them a meal and to give them a place to stay, a place to sleep. It was part of God's obligation on his people. If you were rural, not in a town, you lived out, and someone came across your land, you weren't to treat them as a trespasser. You were to treat them as a guest. You were to put a meal before them and to offer them whatever it was that they needed. So this is the Israelite code. But notice, David and his men are pushed out here where they're strangers. They have nothing. They have no access to anything. And notice, Nabal doesn't offer them anything. He's a lawbreaker. How many of you get frustrated with people who don't follow the rules, who break the laws, who don't follow civil customs? Come on, be honest. People who don't know how to manage a four-way stop. They just go, and you're like, that's not your turn, right? It makes you crazy. It makes me mad too. Not only that, another thing you need to understand is again, out here in this wilderness region, you're on the outskirts of civilization. It's like being in a border town, the Wild West. It's sort of lawless out there. And all of Nabal's wealth is held in his sheep and his goats. And so they're being herded out here because it's wide open spaces, but it also means that they're vulnerable to bandits who would steal them, to wild animals that would kill them. And so if a neighboring militia, a wandering militia comes and they offer to protect your shepherds and your sheep and your goats, then you were obligated, whether you asked for them to do it or not, they helped protect your property. They preserved your wealth. You were kind of obligated to say thank you with gratuity. And again, Nabal didn't offer any gratuity. Now, how many of you hate lousy tippers? If you're not raising your hand, you've obviously never been a server or a bartender, right? When you depend on your income for people to show kindness to you for your service to them, it's really frustrating. It drives me crazy. But I'll tell you, the insult that really stuck with David was when Nabal said this. Who is this David? Who is this son of Jesse? Everybody knows who David is. It's not like he doesn't really know. He's more declaring that David is insignificant. Then he says this, many servants are breaking away from their masters these days. Oh. See, the truth is, David wasn't breaking away from his master, King Saul. He was trying to be loyal. He was being faithful to Saul. Saul is the one who's trying to kill David. David has done nothing wrong. Saul is the guy who's been the aggressor. And Nabal just slanders David in the worst possible way, saying, oh yeah, I know about servants who try to run away from their masters. That's all this David is. Anyone hate it when your integrity is insulted? Does that bother you trying to do what's right? And in fact, you get accused of doing wrong? Does that sit wrong with anyone else? That make you crazy? It does for me. So here we are. We have this situation like we talked about last week that is ripe for conflict, opposing opinions, strong emotions, high stakes. These are moments that are ripe for conflict. If we could learn to leverage the lost craft of hard conversations, we could avert conflict, even in these kinds of situations, at least messy conflict. And so we're going to see how this plays out. You got all the elements ready for something to happen. And now we're going to see how David, we saw him last week, he handled all this pretty well. We're going to see how David, this man of God, a man after God's own heart, we're going to see how he handles this situation. We're going to learn from David. So David's men turned around and they went back. When they arrived, they reported every word. David said to his men, each of you strap on your sword. So they did. And David strapped on his sword as well. About 400 men went up with David, while 200 stayed with the supplies. David is about to make everything worse. He's in that situation where there's high stakes and opposing opinions and it's ripe for conflict. And you'd expect David, this man of God, to be wiser about this, but he's about to inflame the entire situation. Here's a truth I'm going to give you right up front. Conflict is unavoidable. We know this. We talked about it last week. Conflict is unavoidable. You need to have conflict in order to have relationship. You need to have conflict in order to grow. But what causes conflicts to escalate and to become unhealthy is always me. Now, I'm not saying this that you can put all of that on me. It's not Dion, it's you too, right? We can say this, conflict is unavoidable. What causes conflicts to escalate is always me. I'm the one who takes a situation that's already kind of rough and escalates it. I'm the one who's ultimately responsible for things getting unhealthy. And I think for a lot of us, that's hard to accept. Because you think, well, wait a minute. And Nabal was being a jerk. Yeah, he was being a jerk. Absolutely. And yet David still had choices, didn't he? In spite of everything that Nabal did, all of those offenses, he's a lawbreaker, he's a bad tipper, he's insulting David's integrity, slandering David. David could have chosen any number of responses that could have made things better. He could have requested a summit, a sit down with Nabal. So wait a minute, we're gonna try this again. We're gonna have a conversation. I'm gonna explain to you some things. He could have done that, and yet he doesn't. He could have said, forget it, and moved on. Just said, you know what, whatever, this guy's a jerk. I'm not protecting his sheep anymore, whatever. He could have given him a mulligan, a do-over. In our house, we love to do this. Jocelyn introduced this to us. You know, you get in a fight, and you're trying to then work through the fight, and it's you said this, and you did this, and you're trying to untangle all of it, and eventually it just gets so messy that Jocelyn started just going, hey, can we just start over? Can we just start over? And at first that seems really unjust, but it actually is really, really helpful to go, okay, let's just start over. Not every conflict has to be mapped out and untangled. We can just start over. David could have done that for Nabal. Hey, let's just start over. He could have surrendered the situation to God. Part of what makes this such a high stakes moment is that David and his men are on the outskirts. They don't have provisions. They don't have money. They don't have supplies. Things are getting dire, and they're kind of depending on Nabal to show them some kindness because they don't have food to eat, and they're not going to get it from anywhere else out in the wilderness. And yet, in the same wilderness, God miraculously fed his people for decades. David knew that. So David could have surrendered the whole thing to God and said, God, I'm in a bad spot here. I was a good guy, and now a bad guy has not repaid my goodness with goodness. He's repaid it with evil, and I need you to make up the difference, right? David could have handled this any other number of ways, and most of those would have averted the crisis. But instead, he doesn't do that. He hears the news, and he's like, strap on your swords. Lock and load, boys. And he takes 2/3 of his entire army to go up and massacre Nabal's family. Why? Because this is what righteous people do and David's the sheriff in town? No. Because David is now escalating the conflict because Nabal, especially in that last thing I showed you, that insult, who is David? Many servants are breaking away from their masters these days. Nabal said something that landed right in David's deep woundedness. Now, I think I have insight into David's woundedness. So just follow me in this. And the reason I think I have insight is because I think David and I are actually a lot alike. See, I, like David, really want to do things the right way. It's very, very important to me to try to live with integrity, to try to take the high road, and I work really hard at it. Sometimes maybe too hard, because that can leave me in a place of perfectionism. And perfectionism has its own challenges with it, but the real challenge of perfectionism is that perfectionism ultimately leads you to being judgmental of yourself and everyone around you who cannot meet your standards. Trying to take the high road all the time can leave you exhausted. It does me. And then when I'm exhausted, I get resentful, from always having to be the guy that takes the high road. And then I believe I'm entitled to lash out on people who do not, to be the sheriff, to keep people in line. I can start to believe that I'm morally superior or I'm the smartest guy in the room, and so it causes me not to listen to other people or to heed what other people say. It leaves me in a place where I feel owed certain things, because if I'm doing life right, and when I do things right, it's supposed to work out for me. Things are supposed to work out, and when it doesn't work out, even after I've done everything right, if this plus this doesn't equal what it's supposed to equal, I seethe with anger. And the reason I do that is not because I have a high value of righteousness. I do, but the real reason is I'm operating out of a place of woundedness. One of my deepest wounds is this wound that tells me that I don't deserve good things in life. That I'm not gonna get good things in life unless I try to be exceedingly good. That good things will not come to me in life, only bad things will come to me in life. That's a wound, that's a lie, but I believe it, it's deep inside of me, that I'm not worthy of good things unless I am exceedingly good. And then if I am, then maybe I deserve good things. Which, by the way, makes me a complete pagan. I once had a counselor who said that to me. We was explaining some of this to him about just how I see the world, and he was like, I thought you were a Christian pastor. And like, well, I am a Christian pastor. Not only am I a Christian pastor, I'm a Lutheran pastor. Like, severely educated, and I have great theology. And he says, well, what you just said sounds really pagan. It's ready to fight him. Like, how dare you? Like pagan. And what he was saying is, pagan religions, these ancient religions that about, like in Greek mythology and stuff. Pagan religions basically say that the gods, they're not much different than us. They play games, they're mischievous, they're not that interested in us. But if you do the right song or the right dance or you make the right sacrifice, you can manipulate them into being good to you. If you scratch their back, then they'll have to scratch yours. Or you can strong arm them into being good, to make it rain, to make your crops grow, to get you what you want. That's what pagan religion says, that you have to be exceedingly good, or you have to do the right things in order to get God to be good to you. And I know that's not true theologically, but when push comes to shove, when my woundedness is activated, all of my good theology melts away and I become a pagan. But just in case anyone is confused about the nature of God today, let me set the record straight. You can't manipulate God because he's God. You can't strong arm him. His arm is stronger than yours. Not only that, not only can't you overpower God or manipulate him, you don't need to. Because the God, the only living God, the true God, is a God who longs to be good to you. He's so kind to you. He loves you deeply. There's a song, it's a worship song called Jireh. It's by Maverick City. And there's this opening lyric in the song. I think it's taken from an old Christian saying. I swear I've heard it before. But the opening of the song says this: I'll never be more loved than I am right now. I love that part. I'll never be more loved than I am right now. If I'm exceedingly good, if I'm exceedingly bad, it does not change anything. I cannot be more loved by God than I am right now in this moment, because God's affection for me will never change. And then it goes on, and I love this part. Wasn't holding you up, so there's nothing I can do to let you down. Speaking to God, I wasn't holding you up, so there's nothing I can do to let you down. I need this reminder, and maybe you do too today. That you don't carry God around on your shoulders. He's not depending on you for anything. He doesn't need you for anything. You don't have to prove anything. You're not holding God up. You can't let him down. You can't prove your love to God. You can't prove your worthiness to God. None of that matters, because God has already proven to you that he will be exceedingly good to you no matter what. That he loves you no matter what. Jesus is the proof of that. That God gives us Jesus, it's a testimony to the fact that God will always be good to us, regardless of our level of deserving. Romans puts this so clear. It says, you see, at just the right time, when we were still powerless, Christ died for bad people, for the ungodly. And Paul goes on and he says, very rarely will anyone die for a righteous person, Though I guess for a good person, someone might possibly dare to die. A lot of us live with this mindset. If I'm just good enough, if I'm good enough, then people will be good to me in return. And Paul says, yeah, maybe. Maybe if you're a really good person, someone in your life will take a bullet for you. Maybe. But don't count on it. Very rarely will anyone die for a righteous person, though it might happen. And then he says this. But God demonstrates his own love for us, his unique kind of love, his very unpagan kind of love. God demonstrates his own love for us in this: while we were still sinners, while we were at our worst, Christ died for us. So you can't earn God's love and goodness. You don't have to prove it. You can't push it away. You can't get more of it. It is what it is. God will be who he will be. He will do what he will do. You cannot stop God from being himself and doing what he wants to do. And so God is a God who will be good to you. You can count on that. He'll always work for your good. But me and my woundedness, I have a hard time believing that, because I don't believe that's true. And it's not just with God, but it's also with people. See, I tend to believe that if I live with integrity, if I take the high road, if I do the right thing, then what that means is that the people around me will trust me, they'll love me. As a leader, they'll follow me, and they'll be inspired to reciprocate. They'll live with integrity and uprightness, that they will work as hard at being good as I do. And when that doesn't happen, I get angry. Every bit as angry as we saw David get. I'm like, strap on your sword. It is time to go to battle. It makes me so, so angry. What about you? When you do everything right and people return your good with evil. Here's what we need to understand. That probably is not just a sense of justice or rightness or fairness that's gotten us to that point. It's our woundedness. Now, maybe I'm projecting my woundedness on David. I don't think so, but maybe I am, and who knows? I've never had to sit down with David. I couldn't ask him about it. I'm just inferring. And maybe your woundedness is different. Maybe what I just said connects to you. Maybe it doesn't, but here's what I can promise you. It is your wounds. Not the behavior of the other person, but how that behavior lands. It is your wounds that consistently energizes your biggest conflicts in life. It is your wounds, not the belligerence of the other person or the unfairness of the other person or the coldness of the other person. It is your wounds that keeps the battle going, that takes what could be a hard conversation and a healthy form of conflict. It is your wounds that consistently takes it to a healthy place. So it's time to get curious. It's time to get curious about your wounds. To recognize them the next time you find yourself becoming less civilized and wanting to strap on your sword or get into a barroom brawl. It's important to get curious and start to ask yourselves question, what's going on in me right now? How is not just the action of the person wrong, but how is that landing in a tender spot in me? What is that doing to my wounds? What is that wound that's being activated? For me, the Enneagram is a great tool that's helped me kind of sort through this. I don't know what it is for you, but until you recognize your woundedness at play, you're going to have a hard time reclaiming the lost craft of hard conversations. Luckily, though, David gets some help here. He can't see it for himself, but God provides someone, Abigail, the wife of Nabal. So one of the servants told Abigail, Nabal's wife, "Hey, I don't know if you know this, Abigail, but David sent messengers from the wilderness to give our master his greetings, but our master hurled insults at them. Yet these men were in fact very good to us. They did not mistreat us, and the whole time we were out there in the fields near them, nothing went missing." Again, not only did they not steal anything, but they protected us from loss. If you were a shepherd out in the wilderness, you kind of had a loss calculation, you knew you were gonna lose something. They lost nothing. Night and day, they were a wall around us the whole time we were herding our sheep near them. Now think it over and see what you can do, because disaster is hanging over our master and his whole household. He is such a wicked man that no one can talk to him. I want to pause here for a minute. Nabal is such a wicked man that no one can talk to him. I wonder, though, if sometimes this describes you. Maybe not the wicked part, but being a person that no one can talk to. I think to protect our woundedness, a lot of us become these kinds of people. Maybe that's by being the smartest person in the room that no one can challenge, or the most powerful person in the room, the leader, so no one can say anything against us. Maybe it's being the most aggressive person in the room, so everyone's afraid of us. Or maybe it's being the most pitiful person in the room because everyone's afraid to upset us. Some of us are masters at weaponizing our tears to keep people from talking to us, saying anything to us that we wouldn't like. The great plot twist here, I think the great irony here is these servants are talking about Nabal, but here's what you need to understand. David has also become this kind of guy. See, the context of this entire chapter is important. At the very beginning of this chapter, we saw these words. Now Samuel died. Remember I told you Samuel, what was his role? What was his job? He was a prophet. He was the prophet of Israel. Prophets were God's provision to speak truth to people in power. People so powerful like kings and generals of great armies, people that no one else had the courage to speak truth to. Prophets were God's provision. They were people God raised up who would always speak the truth. And Samuel had done that for Saul. He had done that for David. He had been their moral compass. He had been their challenger. But now Samuel is dead. And now there's no one left to tell David the truth anymore. And so David is in a very vulnerable position. He's become a man that no one can talk to. No one's going to stop him. No one's going to prevent him from doing this. His woundedness is activated. He's about to take what is a conflict and make it into a melee. But God in his mercy, he loves David and he loves you too. And so he provides, even though Samuel is dead, he provides someone else. He provides Abigail. Abigail acted quickly. She took 200 loaves of bread, 200 loaves, 2 skins of wine, 5 dressed sheep, 5 seahs of roasted grain, 100 cakes of raisins, and 200 cakes of pressed figs. I mean, this is fine dessert back in these days. And she loaded them on donkeys. A lot of food. Then she told her servants, go on ahead, I'll follow you. But she did not tell her husband Nabal about any of this. As she came riding her donkey into a mountain ravine, there were David and his men. They were descending toward her, right? They're coming to kill everybody. And she met them on the way. In fact, she met them just as David was saying, it's been useless. I mean, this guy is stewing. He's just like, can't stop himself. He's going, it's been useless. All my watching over this fellow's property in the wilderness so that nothing of his was missing. And he has paid me back evil for good. He goes on, may God deal with David, be it ever so severely, if by morning I leave alive one male of all those who belong to him. You hear this? This is a guy who is wounded. I can't believe that I was good and he's been evil to me. It's activating some fear inside of David, so much so that he makes a promise to God, God, deal with me, punish me if I don't kill every male in Nabal's household. That's a pretty sick oath, right? God, punish me if I don't kill everybody. And Abigail hears this. Scary. I mean, David's a guy that no one wants to talk to. But when Abigail saw David, she pressed on. She quickly got off her donkey and she bowed down before David with her face to the ground. She fell at his feet and said, pardon your servant. Now I'm going to smooth out some of the language here. She's using kind of a third person language of deference, and it gets really confusing to read, even for me. So I'm going to try to smooth this out by changing some of the words so we can understand who she's talking about. So pardon your servant, my lord David, and let me speak to you. Hear what I have to say. Please pay no attention, my lord, to what that wicked man Nabal has done. He is just like his name. His name means fool, and folly goes with him. And as for me, Abigail, your servant, I wasn't even there to see the men that you sent, David. And now, David, as surely as the Lord your God lives and as you live, she's making a presumption here. This is her calling out to David's better nature. Since the Lord has kept you from bloodshed and from avenging yourself with your own hands, David's on his way to kill all of these people, and she's assuming that she can speak to David's better nature and bring him back to himself. So, hey, because the Lord has kept you from doing what you're on your way to do right now, may your enemies and all who are intent on harming you be like Nabal. What does that mean? Well, here's this gift. It's like Nabal has reconsidered his position is what she's saying. And let this gift which your servant has brought to you be given to the men who follow you. And then she goes on, please forgive my presumption. The Lord your God will certainly make you, he will certainly make a lasting dynasty for you because you fight the Lord's battles and no wrongdoing will be found in you as long as you live. Even though someone's pursuing you to take your life, right? She's setting the record straight. Nabal slandered him, said David's running away from Saul. She's like, hey, here, we know the truth. The truth is Saul's pursuing you. Here's what you can know, David. Your life, and I love these words, will be bound securely in the bundle of the living by the Lord your God. She's calling David back to some better theology here. David, remember, even though Nabal is insulting you, remember who your protector and your provider is. Your men may be near starving, but remember who God is. God is a God who will hold you, who will bound you, bundle you securely in the bundle of the living. David, it's not your action. It's not Nabal who's your provider. God's going to take care of you, David. Just remember, take a breath. God's going to take care of you. But in contrast, the lives of your enemies, he will hurl away as from the pocket of a sling. He'll bring justice to those who need it. When the Lord has fulfilled for you every good thing he promised concerning you and has appointed you ruler of Israel, you will not have on your conscience the staggering burden of needless bloodshed or of having avenged yourself. It's a bad look for a king to go and massacre a wealthy man. And then when the Lord your God has brought you success, remember the lady who helped you out, who spoke truth to you. The guy that no one can talk to, Abigail has the courage to go and to help him see what's really happening here. He's lost his theology. He's gotten way upset. He's lost all perspective. And she helps him see that he is the problem here. Jesus himself said the same thing years later. He said, why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, hey, let me help you with the speck out of your eye when all the time there's a plank in your own eye? You hypocrite, first take the plank out of your own eye and then you will be able to see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. What does Jesus say? Jesus says, yeah, when you're in a disagreement or a misunderstanding, you may be so focused on the speck in the other person's eye, you see they're wrong. And in this story, it's natural for us to see all the things that Nabal is doing that are wrong. But Jesus says, hey, keep in mind this, that no matter what you see about the other person, that's a speck in their eye. Instead of paying attention to the speck in their eye, pay attention to the plank in yours. When you are tempted to go all sons of anarchy on that person who's offended you, because Jesus says, slow down. There may be a speck there. Pay attention to the plank in your eye. I heard A.J. Mastic say this week, he said, it's like middle school band. They tell you in middle school band that if you're playing and you hear someone is out of tune, assume it's you. And Jesus says the same. You're in a conflict and, the problem is that guy, that Nabal, he's such a wicked fool. All that's true. And yet Jesus says, the righteous action is to pay attention to the plank in your own eye. And I love that Jesus chooses eyes here because we all know how badly it hurts to get something in our eye. Even a tiny little piece of dust or sand or sawdust, it hurts so badly. So imagine how badly it hurts when there's a plank in your eye. See, Jesus is describing how when we're wounded, when we're in pain, we can't see clearly. We lose all perspective. We even lose sound theology that would protect us. We're lost until we do the work on ourselves first. Jesus does not deny that there are things that need to be dealt with other people, because he says, first remove the plank, and then you'll be able to see the speck. Like you can get there, and we're going to get there in the series, I promise. But Jesus says you got to do your work first. You got to get curious about what's going on in you first. Your anger is a cue. Your resentment is a cue. Your entitlement, your outrage, those things are cues that something is going on with you. There's a plank in your own eye that needs to be dealt with. And Abigail helps David see the plank in his eye. David said to Abigail, "Praise be to the Lord, the God of Israel, who has sent you today to meet me, because you helped me see it." I get it now. David's just kind of like back to his right mind. "May you be blessed for your good judgment and for keeping me from bloodshed this day and from avenging myself with my own hands." I don't need to do this, right? God's my provider. "Otherwise, as surely as the Lord, the God of Israel lives, who has kept me from harming you, if you had not come quickly to meet me, not one male belonging to Nabal would have been left alive by daybreak." Then David accepted from her hand what she had brought him and said, "Go home in peace. I have heard your words and granted your request." Final principle. It's pretty simple today. Just in the same way last week, we realized that we have to embrace that conflict is a reality and not fear it. If you do it well, it'll grow our relationships. It'll bring us to greater happiness and peace and meaning in life. The second technique is, before we do anything else, we got to recognize our own wounds. Get curious about and attend to your own wounds first. What about the other person's stuff? That comes later. But Jesus' words, first take the plank out of your own eye. That's what comes first. And when David does this, when he focuses on himself, when he gets right within himself, when he deals with his own anger and his outrage and how that activated his woundedness, when he brings himself back to the truth of who God is his defender, God is his PR agent, God is his provider, God is the one who's going to take care, God is the justice bringer. When he gets back to that place, not only does he not do something really evil and not good for a future king to do, but then he leaves room for God to take care of the rest. I'm not gonna read this today because I wanna be respectful of our time. You can go home and read the rest of the story, but here's what I'll tell you. There's this great poetic justice moment at the end of this story. Looks like it's done, it's not done. But what happens is Abigail goes home, she tells her husband about everything. The guy has a heart attack or a stroke. He lies like in a coma for about 10 days, and then he dies. And then once David hears that Abigail's now a widow, he invites Abigail to come be his wife, and he marries her because she's such an amazing woman. And she quickly goes and she marries David. See, the lesson in all of this is God is faithful. You don't need to fight your own battles. God is faithful. God is faithful, which frees you to focus on you. Let's pray and ask God's help for that. God in heaven, we thank you that you regard us so highly, whether we feel deserving of it or not. In moments when we feel like we should be regarded, in moments when we feel like we should be cast aside. Thank you for not changing. Thank you for being who you are and doing what you will do. God, I pray that the security of your opinion of us, that would give us the courage to deal with our wounds. It would give us the courage to, whenever we're in a conflict with someone and we're so focused on the speck in their eye, the thing that they did wrong, that we'd pause and we'd get curious about whatever plank might be in our own eye. By your Spirit, Lord, reveal these things to us with time. When we are outraged, when we're angry, when we are resentful, when we're bitter, when those emotions come up, Lord, by your Spirit, just insert a pause that will give us a moment to reflect and get curious, to wonder not just about what it was that the other person did, but why it landed in the way that it did, that we might be kept from evil.